I was afraid I was going to fall down the stairs. We did legs this morning. Only for like 20 minutes, too. You know you're getting old when that begins to happen. You're just like, you wuss. I know. It's all okay. Hey, if you're here for the first time, my name is Paul Watson, and I'm the pastor of this service called The Door, and we're glad you're here. We've been in this series on finances called Lost, and we're going to get into that in just a second. But before I go any further, I just need to say that we've got something really special at the end of service. And so after we've prayed for people, after we've done the last song, we've got one more thing. And I can't tell you what it is, but it's going to be very cool, and I'm going to encourage you to stick around for it, okay? All right? All right. So we've been in this series, and it's called Lost, and it's just basically about that everybody has the ability to get lost in their finances. And what's really funny is that when you're lost in your finances, so many people think that they're the only ones. Or they think, I know that other people are lost, but nobody's lost as much as I am. And you begin to do this thing. And so at the beginning of this talk, I had everybody fill out that budget sheet. And hopefully you are keeping track of all of your spending this month, because this next week is the day of reckoning. This is when you're going to do the math, and you're going to add up how much money you've spent. And really, we've let you go for 6 weeks. And you're going to add up all the numbers and find out just where all your money goes. And then last week, I did a whole thing where I did a debt-to-income ratio. And some of you guys really loved that. And some of you cursed my name. And it was like this astonishment of like, oh no, I'm worth nothing. And some of you were thinking, oh, I wish I was worth nothing, because I owe a lot of people a lot of money. And we've been going through this thing, but here's the really great part, is that because no matter where you're at, the best part is when you discover not only that you're lost, but all of a sudden you begin to create a plan of how to get unlost. And that's where both of those tools come into play. And for some people, I heard one guy say this week that it was just nice to be able to see that there's light at the end of the tunnel. That for so long, he's felt like that there was no hope, no light. And then all of a sudden you can look up and go, oh, there is light at the end of the tunnel. And here's the great part, because so much of what happens in our finances really does reflect what happens in our spiritual walk with God. And that we can tie those two together really quite easily, because there's many times where you're in your walk with God and you just feel like, man, how am I going to get back to God? Or man, I just don't feel like there's any hope. And that is the great part about God. And so tonight what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about contentment. And there's some really great parts about discontentment, and discontentment can do a lot of really amazing things. We live in a country that started at the edge of discontentment, where people looked up and they said, I just don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to do country like we've done it in the past. We want a new country. We don't want to do it this way anymore. And we came out of a revolution because of discontentment. But what's really interesting about discontentment is not only can it be good, not only can it do this passionate fire inside you, but it also has a two-edged sword to it, and the other edge can cause major destruction in your life. We live in a country that is, just as Tim was praying and thanking God for the country we live in, we live in an amazing country where you can get ice cream 24 hours a day. Okay, so I'm the only one that thought that was a great deal. I just think, how cool is that we, even us in Grand Junction, we're just getting our very first real Starbucks. And I got to tell you, I think that's from God. I think that I drive by and I watch the building go up and I just hear angels going, whoa. And it's amazing. Because I think that even though I love Starbucks and I spend way too much money at Starbucks, I think that the fact that you have to walk into Safeway to get Starbucks just diminishes the whole thing, you know? But you can buy jawbreakers in America that are as big as your head. That's cool. I was in Walmart this past week, and I was able to buy shotgun shells and chicken in the same store. How absolutely cool is that? We live in a country where we just have great opportunity. We have food on every corner. We have like the world's best entertainment. I mean, right now you can flip on the TV, and for free you get to watch the hockey, basketball, and baseball. That's like a sportsman's dream. My wife knows that I'm home because when she walks in, the TV's probably on, and it's either on the news or it's on ESPN. We even have the ability. Now, this blows me away. I had some friends go to Florida, and they came back, and they said, Paul, did you know this little-known fact? That we build theme parks that have their own zip codes. That's how big they are, just for fun. And yet, in all of those things, why is it that we are so easily discontent? Why do we become discontent with our lives and what we have so quickly? Am I the only one? I was down in Panama about 4 years ago. And we went back into the depths of the jungle. And when I'm talking the depths of the jungle, we literally took boats. And we would call them boats, but they weren't boats. They were really hollowed out trees. We really did that. And we went back into the jungle probably about 2.5 hours or something like that. And we get back into this native tribe that is still so far behind modern times that, like, they're still cooking off of stones. And that the wealthy guys in the tribe, they had one cleat because they played soccer all the time. And when they got 2 pair, they would split it with one other person. And so there'd be people in there that just had one cleat, and they had smiles on their faces. And there's this crazy thing that in America that we drive around our cars, and you know that I get a car, and I'm driving my car around, and it runs fine. It's only got 43,000 miles on it. It's 1993. We got it from Linnea's grandfather. And you know what? As amazing as that car gets, when I get in somebody else's car and it has that new car smell, and I get in my car and it smells like Grandpa, it ruins the whole thing. And I think to myself, God, why can't I have a new car with the new car smell? Why can't I have a 52-inch flat screen instead of a TV that I bought at a garage sale? You know what I'm saying? And we look and we go to our friends' house, and maybe they built a new house and they've got a brand new kitchen, and we think, why can't I have the brand new kitchen? And all of a sudden, that in a land with so much stuff, with more stuff than any other land's ever known, we have a whole society that's filled with discontentment. I have a buddy who lived with us years ago, and he had taken a job working for Pizza Hut. And he was with one of the pizza delivery guys. And it actually wasn't Pizza Hut, it was Domino's. And one night in the middle of the night, he woke me up about 3 o'clock in the morning. And he came in, he's like, dude, we need to go for a walk or a talk or a drive or something, but I just got to talk to you. I'm like, okay, whatever this is about. And so we get in the car and we drive around, and he's just silent for like 20, 30 minutes. We're just driving around, and I'm like, is everything okay? He's like, no, things aren't good. I'm like, what happened? He's like, do you remember that guy we went to middle school and high school with? I'm like, yeah. Like the guy that other people made fun of? Like, yeah. I delivered a pizza to his house today. He lives in a $500,000 home, and I'm delivering pizzas. Do you know how bad that made me feel? And I just was like, oh, that probably was not a good experience, right? Because what did he do? The discontentment inside him made him compare himself to that guy. And so we live in this society that we have more than anything that other societies have had before us. And we still walk around and wonder why we don't have enough. Why we don't have more stuff. Or why the stuff that we have can't be newer, better, nicer. And what's really interesting is that the Bible is so wise. Because you take the Bible and you open it up, and you see what the Bible has to say about discontentment. And that you take the writings that are 2,000 years old that Paul wrote to Timothy, and you see that the wisdom of God is good for all men and all women all the time throughout every century, throughout every economy, throughout all the world. And so 1 Timothy, if you want to flip your Bibles over, says this. It's 1 Timothy 6 through 11. And then we're going to skip some portions in there, and we're going to go down to verses 17 and 19. And I want you to know something, because I would really encourage you that as you hear talks and you take notes and you keep them in your Bibles, one of the things that I really encourage people to do is that you wonder, what should I study during the week? What should become my Bible study? What you're hearing at church is a great thing to study during the week. And so I encourage you to read 1 Timothy 6. And I want you to catch this part, because it's not in my passage portion. It actually happens in 1 Timothy 6, verse 5. And I'm not starting it there because it just kind of messes up the flow of the read. But here's something interesting. That he says in verse 5, he says, be careful. Even though I'm not reading it, he says, be careful. And the reason you need to be careful, and he's telling Timothy, who's planting a church, who's pastoring a church, is a young guy that's planted a church and pastoring a church. He says, Timothy, be really, really careful when it comes to the area of money. He says, because there's a lot of guys that use churches to make money. And he said, don't be one of those guys. And you need to know, as a church, man, we are absolutely 100% committed to you guys. And we say this, if you ever are in a church service, whether it's this church or whether it's another church, and you feel manipulated to give, man, don't you dare do it. The Bible talks really clearly about that, and we're gonna read that here. But just the idea that I want you to know that as a pastor, I'm not going to pass by that scripture without talking about it, because there's been a lot of people who use church to manipulate people. And you know what? I do not want to be standing in their shoes. And I don't want to be one of those guys that are going to have to stand before God on that. And so I'm telling you right now, in the area of finances, if you ever feel manipulated by a church, you walk away. Okay? All right. So 1 Timothy 6, verse 6, it says this. Yet true religion with contentment is great wealth. That's a huge statement. And if I was you in my Bible, I would highlight that. And if you were to look at my Bible, I believe that is highlighted. And the reason I'm not reading it out of here is because it has little tiny writing, and I'm now 38. And it's harder for me, so I have it in my notes. Yet true religion with contentment is great wealth. After all, we didn't bring anything with us when we came into the world, and we certainly can't carry anything with us when we die. So if we have enough food and clothing, let us be content. Huge portion right there. But people who long to be rich fall in temptations and are trapped by many foolish and harmful desires that plunge them into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is at the root of all kinds of evil. And some people craving money have wandered from their faith and pierced themselves with many sorrows. But you, Timothy, belong to God. So run from all these evil things and follow what is right and good. Pursue a godly life, along with faith and love, perseverance and gentleness. And then he skips down to verse 17, or I'm skipping down to verse 17. Because there's a break in there where he's giving him instructions other than that on finances, and we're studying finances, okay? So then he skips down, and in verse 17 he says this. Tell those who are rich in this world not to be proud and not to trust in their money, which will soon be gone. But their trust should be in the living God, who richly gives us all we need for our enjoyment. Tell them to use their money to do good. They should be rich in good works and should give generously to those in need, always being ready to share with others whatever God has given them. By doing this, they will be storing up their treasures as a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of real life. And verily, the very first thing that he comes out and he just says this really simple statement that we all know, but we have a hard time practicing. And the statement is just simply this: learn to be content with what you have. Why is that such a hard deal? Why is it so hard that that in a country where you can get ice cream 24 hours a day, and that you can go by Starbucks and hear the angels sing and pull right in there and be like, oh yeah, heaven on earth, white mocha, thank you, ma'am. And all of a sudden, that we live in this country with all this stuff, and yet inside there's this discontentment, there's this disconnect, there's this thing that lingers and goes, ah. Oh. And he says, yet true religion with contentment is great wealth. And he's saying this, that when you have trusted with all your heart in God, and that one of the signs that you've trusted God with all your heart is contentment. That because when you trust God, you step back and you go, hey, it's good, I don't need that. Because one of the things that we do in America is this, is that because of our discontentment, we buy things to make us feel better, right? You ever have a bad day? And you're like, okay, I need to go shopping. I need to spend money. I hear ladies say, I need to eat chocolate, which I can't say anything because I like eating chocolate too. I wander from office to office. Hey, we probably need to talk. You got any chocolate? And they're like, no, I don't have any chocolate. Okay, meeting's over. Meeting's adjourned. Go to another office. Got any chocolate? But he's saying this, that true contentment is coming back and knowing God, knowing where you stand before God, knowing why you have the things that you have, and knowing who gave them to you. And that leads to true contentment. And then he kicks down and he says that we didn't bring anything into the world. We came in naked. One of these days we're going to leave. And I guarantee you don't get to take it with you. And he says, so if you have enough food and clothing, let us be content. And so I'm pondering this, and I'm thinking, why in America is it so hard to be content in a land that has so much? And basically what he's saying is this. He's saying the reason that it's so hard to be content in a world that has so much is because much stuff clouds the eyes. You lose sight of what's important. The hard part about contentment is not learning to be content with what you have. It's learning to be content with what you don't. Did you know that? The hard part is not learning to be content with what you have. It's learning to be content with what you don't. Because in America, everywhere we go, as long as our eyeballs are open, what we see is not what we have, it's what we don't. You walk through the grocery store and you think, I don't have that. You walk through the mall and all these great shops with all these windows have these great things in there, and they're just saying, oh, by the way, did you know you don't have this? You walk through Sears and go through the TV section, and the 52-inch flat screen TVs are on. And what are they reminding you of? What you don't have, right? I had a guy here a couple years ago, probably one of the coolest things that's ever happened to me. I had this guy that I'd never met in my life. And I think that we can have amazing things happen to us and still know that it's God, and still watch things that happen to us and still come up on the short end of contentment. And so one day I'm just hanging out and I'm just standing around, and this guy walks up to me that I've never met him in my life. And he looks at me in the eyes and says, hey, you like motorcycles? I said, oh, dude, I love motorcycles. If there's anything that's really cool, it's a loud motorcycle. Just the louder, the better. It's just cool. And anything that looks like, just it takes my breath away. Just a moment there. Just a motorcycle. And you get on it, and it's loud, and you have the wind blowing in your face, and it's an amazing experience, and you're just like, wow. And so he said, you like motorcycles? So we're talking about motorcycles. He says, do you have one? I said, no, I don't have a motorcycle. He's like, you like motorcycles, but you don't have a motorcycle? I'm like, no, I sold my motorcycle because every time I buy something, I get buyer's remorse, and then I feel guilty about it, and so then I sell it. And he's like, oh, okay. He said, stick out your hand. I'm like, okay, stick out my hand. He puts the keys to a motorcycle in my hand. And he says, now you do. I'm like, You're kidding, right? He's like, no. I'll come by. I'll bring it by your house. I'll bring it by your place. And he drops off this Honda motorcycle. A sweet bike, very neat bike. But all my friends ride Harleys. And I have no idea why. I am very happy with my motorcycle. It didn't cost me anything. It was free. I didn't even know the guy was going to give it to me. I didn't ask. I didn't have any of that. And I believe, I just go, thank you, Lord God, for gifts like that. And at the same time, when I ride up on my Honda motorcycle and these guys are on their Harleys, there is something inside going, I would love a motorcycle payment. Right? Because there's this discontentment that takes over your heart. Because contentment is not learning to be content with what you have. I mean, it's part of it. It's learning to be content with what you don't. It's learning to be content with what God's provided for you. You see, one of the major traps when it comes to finances is just simply this. Discontentment. And in your notes, I've written the words, let me read it to you. Discontentment leads to feeling trapped financially. But I want you to take the word feeling, and I want you to mark that word out. Or you can leave it in there. But I want you to place in that sentence, discontentment leads to being trapped financially. Because you see what happens is we walk around and we see all these things that we don't have and all these things that we should have because all of our friends have these things. And because our friends have these things, well, I'm equally as good as my friends. All right, okay, I'm better than my friends. Have you seen my friends? And you look at their stuff and you're like, well, I should have better than that because they have this and I know what I have and I know what they have and I know where they come from and I know where I come from. Well, I should have that. 1 Timothy 6, 9 through 10. But people who long to be rich fall into temptations and are trapped by many foolish and harmful desires that plunge them into ruin. Okay, catch this. This is really important. Paul is not telling Timothy that it's a sin to be rich. Okay? And sometimes the church will tell you that. Guys, that's not what the Bible doesn't teach that at all. At all. But as a matter of fact, the Bible does teach that when you long to be rich, you are going to have more trials than people that don't. Why? Because now there's more temptation that comes your way. You can afford more. You can do more. You can lose sight of more. And he's saying, be really careful. Be really careful. For the love of money is at the root of all kinds of evil. And some people craving money have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many sorrows. You see, when I'm discontent with what I have, I begin to feel like if I had something else, I would feel better about myself. And then what happens is we begin to look for ourselves, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but we begin to look for things that will bring us contentment. And in the process of looking for things to bring us contentment, we lose sight of the one who brings contentment, and that's God. And that people will do crazy things for money. And I want you to catch this life principle. I want you to find the place on your piece of paper. I know we didn't give you a lot of room to write because we've got that Da Vinci article on the back, which is really important. And that training is coming up on Sunday at 4 o'clock, if you can make that. But I want you to write this life principle. And I don't care at what stage of life you're at, this is a principle you need to learn. And it's simple. It's really, really simple. And as a matter of fact, your parents taught it to you. But you might not have learned it. If you cannot afford it, you should not have it. You see, he's saying this. He's saying that you take your money and all of a sudden you get caught up in all these traps because now there's all this temptation that's coming your way because now you have some money in your pocket. You ever walk around with $20 in your pocket and by the end of the day it's gone? Because you came across life temptations? And so then all these temptations come along your way. And so you begin to talk yourself into a bigger house or a bigger apartment than you can afford. If I just get 4 roommates and stick one of them in this closet and call it a room, I can charge $300 a month for that. How cool is that? I'll just have to get a low-functioning roommate. That was funny. Sorry. But we take ourselves and we talk ourselves into all these situations. We walk into the car dealership and the car dealership guy looks at you and goes, let's see your debt to ratio income. Oh yeah, you can afford a BMW? I know you work at McDonald's, but all the guys down there have one. You're like, oh, okay, then sign me up, man. If you have to lie to yourself to buy the things you want to buy, you are falling into life temptations. If you have to take your credit cards to pay off the credit cards you have, that's not good. That's a bad thing, and it's way too quiet in here at this very moment. I want to ask you a life question. I gave you a life principle, which is if you cannot afford it, you shouldn't have it. I want you to really, really contemplate this question. What do you have in your life right now that you are affording that you shouldn't be? What do you have in your life right now that you are affording that you can't afford? That you could, with one quick blow, change the direction of your finances. I want you to write that down. If you have the ability, write that down. Put it on a piece of paper. Because here's what happens. When we're really honest with ourselves and we put these things on a piece of paper and we look at them, all of a sudden now there's some accountability, even if it's with ourselves. And if you really, really, really want to be accountable, share it with a friend. And say, hey, listen, I need to do this to get back on track with my finances with God. You see, because bad financial decisions don't just lead to a tight budget. If you've ever made any, you know that it leads you down roads that you don't want to go to. If you're married and you ever made some bad financial decisions, it has the ability to stress a marriage out. It has the ability to cause you to lie, to work way too much for way too little. And it causes you to be stressed and be trapped financially. You see, at some point, you've got to begin to trust God. And you've got to begin to trust that God's plan is better than your plan. And God's plan leads you to freedom. I love Proverbs 3:5 that says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not depend upon your own understanding. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not depend upon your own understanding. And you see, the other thing that happens with discontentment is that we begin to find our identity in what we own. Don't find your identity in what you own. Tell those who are rich. I think this is really cool because there's not very many times in the Scripture that this happens. Paul is actually saying, gather all those guys together that you consider to be rich. And we know that through this study that a person that's rich is just somebody that has extra. They have more than they need. That's a person who's rich. And whatever that extra is, it's at the end of the day that you didn't have to work 7 days a week. That anybody that has the ability to take 2 days off has extra. And he says, tell all of those who are rich in this world not to be proud and to trust in their money, which will soon be gone. He's actually telling Timothy, here's what I want you to do. I want you to gather up all the rich guys in your group, and I want you to look them in the eyeballs, and I want you to say, guys, be really, really careful about trusting in your money because it has the ability to lead you down roads that you shouldn't go down. You see, sometimes we catch our identity in what we have instead of who God made us to be. You are not the sum total of your possessions. You are more valuable to God than anything that you hold valuable. Because you don't own one item that impresses God. Even if you own the Mona Lisa or a mansion or a Ferrari or a Maserati, it wouldn't matter. Luke 12:21 just simply says, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth, but not have a rich relationship with God. But I want you to catch this because this is really important too that Paul says. He says, but there should be in the living God, but their trust should be in the living God, who richly gives us all we need for our enjoyment. And I believe this. I believe that the things that you have are a gift from God, and that I believe that you should enjoy them. As a matter of fact, we have a guy in our small group. This whole small group thing has been absolutely amazing for our small group. It's been a great Bible study. But it's been really even more fun to find out what toys each other has. And one of the guys in our small group has a houseboat. And so we, in loving kindness and godly discretion, we manipulated him into throwing a party this summer down at Lake Powell and using the small group to facilitate a party on his houseboat. And I believe that you should enjoy the things that God has for you, but never, ever, ever lose sight of why you have them, and never, ever, ever find your identity in those things, because you came into the world without them, and you're going to leave here without them, and they do not make up who you are. And here's the last thing I want you to write down. I just simply want you to write down this. You see, there's one way to deal with discontentment. And it's by making a conscious decision to help people who have less than you. You want to know why you have the things you have? It's to help people who have less than you. But the other side is this, is that when you take your stuff and you use it towards helping people, it changes not only their lives, but it changes your life. You learn to become a giver. He says, he's gathered these guys together and he says, and Timothy, tell them to use their money to do good. They should be rich in good works and should give generously to those in need. Always being ready to share with others whatever God has given them. The only thing that breaks materialism and discontentment is giving. Be a giver. We have some friends that just came back from Russia, January, where they spent about 6 weeks in Russia. But even before the 6 weeks that they went to Russia, they spent about 6 months in preparation, because they really felt like God was calling them to adoption. They really felt like as a Christian couple that one of the things that God had placed them in a position was to financially take care of another human. And so they went to Russia and picked this little guy that his parents, I don't think they passed away. I believe that he was abandoned. And for the rest of his life, this little boy's life is going to be changed because this couple learned to be a giver. I love it. We've got camps coming up, and we are going to take hundreds of middle school kids and elementary kids and high school kids to camp this summer. And we're going to have people who step up and say, you know what, I want to be a giver. I want to be a camp counselor. I don't know if you ever went to camp, but do you remember your camp counselor? And I can tell you that for me, my camp counselor had a major impact in my life. And that you're going to have opportunities to give. And sometimes it's money. Great. But more often than not, it's time and stuff. And God's asking you to give who you are. Because the person He made you is good enough. And the person that God created you to be, you were created to change people's lives. We had a lady last year who wanted to buy a new guitar. And she kept trying to buy this new guitar and kept trying to save her money. And she had her guitar up for sale, and she couldn't sell her guitar. And there was only one reason she figured out that she couldn't sell her guitar, because God had told her not to, and she decided that she needed the money to buy the new guitar so that she needed the money to sell her old guitar. Okay, I'm screwing up the whole story. She had a guitar she wanted to buy. She couldn't afford it, so she was going to sell her guitar to pay for this new guitar. You got it? Is that cool? I'm sure you were tracking with me, although I was screwing it up really badly. And God had told her not to sell her guitar, but to donate her guitar. And for 3 months, she kept trying to sell her guitar, and it would not sell. And it was a nice guitar, and she wasn't asking that much money for it. And one day she came in and she walked into my office, and there was just this knock, and I'm like, hey, what are you doing? She's like, God told me to give this to the student ministry so that they'd have a guitar to lead worship with. And he told me to do it 3 months ago, and I've been disobeying him, and I've been trying to sell it for 3 months, and it wouldn't sell. And so here, I'm giving it to you, but I'm giving it to you, and you just need to know I can't afford to buy the guitar I want to buy because I'm giving you my guitar. She got home, and there was money in the mail, and she was able to buy her guitar. I'm not saying that in any way. Please, please, please do not take that as a manipulation. I'm just saying this. Then in Malachi, God challenges us. Trust me. And you need to know that it is never about giving. I mean, it's never about money. It's always about giving. It's always about the heart. And as a matter of fact, when you take the Old Testament principles on giving, and there's a principle of 10%, and we talked about this last week, and a bunch of you came up and said, hey, well, how much does the Bible say to give? And so here's the explanation. Old Testament is about giving. In the Old Testament, there's this principle, and it's 10%. That 10% of whatever you have, you give towards God's kingdom. Okay? That's the principle. But in the New Testament, Jesus comes along, and he says, hey, here's what you do. You give what it is in your heart to give. And what he's really saying is this isn't a dismissal of the 10% rule. The 10% rule is really a pretty good rule to apply because it's a principle in giving, okay? But here's the deal. Because anytime we lay down a rule, we have people who have the ability to keep the rule without loving God. And what had happened was that the Pharisees and the Sadducees, who were the religious leaders of the time, they were keeping the rule without loving God. And as a matter of fact, if you kick down and you look in Mark chapter 12, verses 41 through 43, Jesus is sitting around this temple, and he's sitting there with the disciples. And he's watching these people give, and it says that they're giving in this collection. And Jesus turns over and he says, hey, let me ask you a question. Who's given the most? And they said, well, that's easy. It's that rich dude. And he said, well, you saw everybody that's given, right? He said, yeah. He said, what about that poor lady? He said, no. She only gave what was equivalent to 2 pennies. She only gave 2 cents. And Jesus said, you guys missed it. Because there's all these rich guys and they're giving. But man, she gave all she had. And you see, what God requires in giving is this. That you give what is in your heart to give. But you don't hold back, and that He has blessed you, and He's blessed your kingdom, and that one of the ways that we give is just simply by saying, you know what, God, I trust you. And so you see, it's not a financial thing at all. For God, it's always a heart thing. It's always a heart issue. And you see, the issue that we have to work out is never about money. It's never about stuff. It's never about relationships. It's never about anything else. It's always about a heart. And where is your heart before God? And here's what I want to do tonight. I want you to, this is not a giving thing, okay? This is where's your heart at with God? That tonight, that you come to the place where you say, you know what, God, this is the issue that I need to work out. My heart with you. And that some of you are in a place in your life there's just discontentment. I'm discontent with my job. I'm discontent with my marriage. I'm discontent with my life. And you see, and so what we're going to do is we're going to close, and we're going to ask the worship team to come back up. And we're going to sing one last song. And we do this thing around here a lot. And the thing is that during the last song, you work out what's going on in your life. That's cool. And then if you need prayer, then you come forward and we'll pray for you. We're not going to do that tonight. We're going to do this. I'm going to ask you to take a risk. Malachi says that if you will trust God, He will pour out the heavens upon your life. Here's the risk. I believe, and I committed to this at the beginning of the year, and I said we're going to do it all year long. And we do it during worship. But I believe that God is a God who answers prayer. I believe that God is real and He's alive and He is living. I believe that He's very, very concerned with our lives. I believe He's very concerned with our state of our lives. I believe that when you ask Him for help, He hears you and listens to you. Tonight, If you are struggling with life in an area and there's discontentment and maybe there's just struggle, tonight I'm going to ask you to raise your hand in just a second and just say, that's me. Here's what I'm going to have happen. Because I believe that the church is only the church when it helps those that are amongst their midst to make it through life. And so when we do this last song, although we will sing this last song in worship, during this last song, I'm just going to ask you to take a chance. I'm going to say, hey, in just a second, I'm going to say, hey, if you're struggling tonight, would you just raise your hand? Then, you guys can't let me down on this. If you are standing next to somebody that has their hand raised, whether they're a seat from you or 4 seats from you or 4 aisles from you, I would like for you to be the church tonight and gather around those people and just say, hey, my name's Paul. I would like to pray for you. Is there anything specific that I could pray for you for? Then they will look at you and say, hey, yeah, this is what's going on. Or maybe they'll just say, hey, there's some stuff going on that's kind of private, but I would appreciate your prayers. All right? Risk, chance. Why? Because when we risk, God shows up. When we believe, God shows up. All right? So, I'm going to ask you to stand up. I'm going to ask you to take a chance. If you are here tonight and you would like some prayer, would you just raise your hand? Take a chance. Go ahead, put your hand, you got to kind of put your hand up high. All right, now be paying attention, be looking around. This is okay to look around. This is what we do. We're the church. We believe that when we pray, God hears us. Okay, this is what we do. Now I want you to find somebody around you that has their hand up, and I want you to just put your hands up on their shoulder, introduce yourself, and pray for each other. Maybe it's finances. Maybe it's other stuff. Do not leave anybody sitting by themselves. We've got a young lady here. We've got a guy back there. Back there in the back, we've got another gentleman. Anybody else? We've got some other hands up. Okay? Right here. Get that right back there, guys. Right back there. Okay? This is what the church does. All right.